So, planning seems to be the talk of the town again, doesn't it? Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Evelyn. I am a chartered town planner and a chartered development surveyor. I make videos here all about the planning and surveying industry. I made a series recounting my journey to becoming a chartered surveyor, which I'm going to link up here if you'd like to watch any of those. And ever since I became chartered, I provide commentary on the relevant news topics of the day, which largely seems to be about planning at the moment. So if you'd like to stick around, make sure you click that subscribe button, and I will be updating my channel with some more videos soon. So it feels like planning has never really left the public agenda since Labour came into power last summer. And I think that part of this is a bit of a scapegoating exercise. It does feel like the government are trying to use planning as the catalyst to create economic prosperity and growth amongst the country. And whilst I do think that having a prosperous building economy goes hand in hand with having a prosperous economy overall, I don't necessarily think that it's fair to put the entire burden of the country's economic status on the planning sector. So what I mean by that is that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made it very clear that they think to get the economy moving again, we need to get Britain back building. And yes, completely agree that the building trade has become stagnant and things are not happening. Planning takes an incredibly long time to do at the moment. But that is not all at the hands of the planning system, and it is certainly not at the hands of those local authority planners who are working so hard day in, day out to just manage what is coming their way. So as a sort of recap of where we're at, just before Christmas, we got an update to the NPPF, that's the National Planning Policy Framework. And that has basically just set out that we need so many more houses. Housing targets have increased all over the country. Where I work, up in North Yorkshire, the North Yorkshire Council, which recently merged, their housing target has more than doubled, which for a largely rural area is pretty wild. I know that this is happening in the southeast as well, and it's part of Keir's ambition to sort of be building, not necessarily completely bulldozering the green belt, but to take a more pragmatic approach to what is suitable to be built in the green belt and what isn't. Largely, I support this. I think we do need more housing. Well, it's no secret. Everyone knows we need more housing in this country. We also need more industrial and employment space. We need more infrastructure. We need more roads. We need more facilities for servicing these new communities. And an interesting point that has come out of everything that's been happening in the last couple of weeks is when the Chancellor made her announcement earlier on this week, she was backing the expansion of Heathrow. So there is obviously the argument that we need more aviation space in this country. And I think Heathrow is a really interesting example to sort of hone in on here. It is no secret that the expansion of Heathrow is an incredibly contentious political hot potato, for want of a better phrase. My views on the expansion of Heathrow are almost irrelevant at this point. If you'd like to know what I think, let me know, and I can do a whole video on what I think the solution to the aviation problem in the southeast in particular, but in the UK is, because I've got some thoughts on this. But the expansion of Heathrow is almost a perfect example of what the problem in this country is. So if you don't know, for context, Heathrow Airport is the largest airport in the country. It serves London, but it's also the big carriers from all over the world fly in and out of Heathrow. So I live up in the north, and basically if you want to get anywhere that isn't the big tourist destinations in mainland Europe, then you need to fly down to Heathrow or get the train down to London and go out to Heathrow to get anywhere. So Heathrow is built out in the west of London. It is basically in the suburbs next to rows and rows of 1930s semi-detached houses. Fun fact, my first ever job in planning was actually working at Heathrow Council, which is adjacent to Heathrow Airport. And you do get used to the planes constantly flying overhead because they come into land between every 30 to 60 seconds, which is pretty wild. But it is still quite startling when you see that A380 coming in over your head and you feel like tons of aircraft are just about to land on you. And if you've ever landed into Heathrow, you'll know that very bizarre feeling of feeling like you're about to land in somebody's back garden. The other constraint of Heathrow, of course, is the M25. It sits right next to the biggest motorway in the UK, which is the orbital ring road that goes around London. And it also crosses with the M4, which comes into London from the west of the country. So where it is, it's incredibly geographically constrained as it is. And the discussions about a third runway at Heathrow have been going on for well over a decade, I think, certainly my entire working career. But back in 2017, when Theresa May was the Prime Minister and we had a Conservative government, they actually brought in royal assent to allow legislation for the third runway at Heathrow and making that the preferred option for the expansion of aviation in the southeast over a second runway at Gatwick, which is London's secondary airport, which sits to the south of London. London actually has something like 5 or 6 airports. I think Oxford calls itself London Oxford Airport, and there's also London Southend Airport, but there are 4 major airports, and Heathrow is the biggest, Gatwick is the second biggest. So those have always been the 2 options for expansion. But earlier on this week, the Chancellor has also confirmed Labour's position as backing Heathrow as the preferred option for aviation expansion in the UK. This is actually directly opposed to what the Mayor of London, who is a Labour mayor, feels. Sadiq Khan is very opposed to the expansion of Heathrow. And everyone kind of sits one side or the other with the Heathrow argument. It's a very Marmite subject. You're either so for it or so against it. I think there are multiple reasons for this. But as I say, it all kind of comes back to a wider picture of what is going on in the planning and development system in this country. So the big argument against the expansion of Heathrow is that it directly flies in the face of the government's ambitions for its environmental targets and the protection of the environment around Heathrow, not just through pollution, but also through all of the areas you would have to bulldoze through to physically create this runway and all the additional infrastructure around it, new terminal buildings, roads, train lines, etc. It's a very, very valid argument, I think. It's weighed up against the need for additional aviation space within the southeast, because if you look at Heathrow in comparison to the other global big airports, Amsterdam Schiphol, Paris Charles de Gaulle, New York JFK, Frankfurt, they are all enormous. I think Schiphol has 6 runways or something like that, whereas Heathrow's managing with 2, and Heathrow is at capacity every single day. So this also creates quite a bad customer experience, because if something happens, if a flight misses its spot, it just throws everything off for the rest of the day, really. And you just have to be able to build in mitigation space into that. So there is a real argument for the expansion of this to create Heathrow as one of the big global players in aviation, in the aviation industry. But as I say, this is weighed up against the protection of the environment, which is supposedly one of the government's big targets, is reducing our carbon emissions and trying to get Britain back to net zero. So how can you possibly support the expansion of an already incredibly polluting airport if you are trying to achieve net zero by, what's their target at the moment? Is it 2035? That's not going to happen. Or 2050 is even seeming quite unrealistic at the moment. The other big talking piece that came out of the Chancellor's speech the other day is the Oxford-Cambridge arc. And again, I think this creates quite an interesting talking point in the industry of what this means. I think, personally, I think it's a great concept. Again, it's something that's been going around for quite a long time, sort of linking the 2 cities with this sort of development arc. There's going to be a new train line. There's going to be whole plethora of infrastructure, housing, etc., to link the 2 great university cities and make it more of an international brand like Silicon Valley, so that we're attracting more talent to the UK. People are going to want to invest here, use our research laboratories, facilities, etc. Great on paper. And the way that this legislatively has been put through shows that it is actually really feasible to pull something like this off if there is the willing to do it and the resource to do it. Granted, it's still taking quite a long time. Not as long as Heathrow is going to take. I think we're looking at least 2040 before anything actually happens at Heathrow, but that's another matter. I think, though, what the whole Oxford Cambridge arc highlights is the inadequacies elsewhere within the system. So, as I say, I work up in the north at the moment and I work for an infrastructure provider. And to put in a planning application for quite a straightforward piece of infrastructure, you're looking at 6 months for determination, 12 months if there's any kind of complexities to the scheme. And that's absolute insanity. We've gotten to the point now where people are so fed up with the planning system that they're taking matters into their own hands and they're developing, they're building houses, they're putting through their developments without getting planning permission, because the idea behind it is if you don't have the resource to approve my planning consent, you're not going to have the resource to enforce against what it is that I'm doing. So I'm just going to do it anyway. And we cannot live in a culture that behaves like that. Planners are there for a reason. They are highly educated people. They know what they're doing. They are there to assess applications and create policy that is in the public interest. So how do we fix this? I don't know. Personally, I think the whole system needs stripping back and scrapping and starting again. We're still working off of the original Act from 1947. The Town and Country Planning Act first came about after the Second World War, and that feels completely inappropriate. But I also accept that that is probably logistically not possible to scrap it all and start again. But there certainly needs to be more funding for local council planning. There needs to be more incentive to keep good planners at local authority. There needs to be a stripping back of some of the red tape. And there just needs to be more excitement in the industry overall, as opposed to this constant finger pointing and blaming of planners and the planning industry for destroying the British economy. I mean, let's not even talk about what Brexit did to the economy, but of course it's all the planners' fault. So sorry if this has been a bit of a ranty, rumbly piece, but hopefully it kind of gives you a bit of a feel of what's going on at the moment, and also of how people who are working in the industry actually feel about all of this. Like I say, I don't like the scapegoating that goes on of the planning system and of planners in particular. And I'm really hopeful that we're moving forward to a new place. The government really are trying to prioritize building housing and building housing in the right places. I'm optimistic and hopeful that this means we're turning a corner and we're going to go somewhere new. But I really don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about everything that's been happening over the last couple of months, in particular following what the Chancellor said on Wednesday. And if there's anything you'd like to hear more from me, then just drop me a comment, let me know, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.